Okay, talking about the main focus on Yom Kippur, we find that we say Vidui multiple times. The first Vidui we say is before the Suda Mavsekis. When we daven Mincha today, this afternoon, as when you get married, the Mincha, the Chosin says, when he gets married, he says the regular Mincha, where he concludes, before he steps out, he says the Vidui, Oshamnu, according to the Aleph Beis, then he goes through all the Al-Chetz that he says on Yom Kippur. For this sin and that sin, and every once in a while, Al-Kulam, El-Kaslicha, Slachlonu, Chalonu, Kaperlonu. You go through every one. And the Gemara asks, why does one? And the Rambam explains it the way the Rambam explains, because it's of course exactly what the Gemara means. Although the obligation of tshuva is only in Yom Kippur, so why do we say vidui before Yom Kippur begins, before the Suda Mavsekis? Gemara says that what would be if one eats the Suda Mavsekis, God forbid, and he chokes and he dies before Yom Kippur begins, before he had a chance to do tshuva? If that would be the case, he would die not as a penitent. So to address that issue, that concern, one says the full vidui before the Suda Mavsekis. This is the reason. Shemi chonek, because he may choke. It's interesting. In our lives, before we eat something, we're never concerned that a person, God forbid, may choke. All of a sudden now, before Yom Kippur begins, before we eat the Suda Mavsekis, I'm concerned that you may not make it to Ma'ariv. That after you eat the Suda Mavsekis, you're celebrating. And let's talk about the Suda Mavsekis. The appellation, the term used for the Suda before Yom Kippur is Suda Mavsekis. It's the Suda, it's the meal which we stop eating before the fast begins. That same term is used before Tisha B'Av, Suda Mavsekis. Except the Suda Mavsekis of Tisha B'Av, it's a meal we eat sitting on the floor. The food we eat is mourner's type of food to indicate grieving. An egg, which is round, the bread, it's dipped in ash as a mourner. And yet here on Erev Yom Kippur, the meal is a celebratory meal. It's a festive meal. You're supposed to serve the meal on your best china, cutlery, glassware, except it should not be in terms of festive, because one has to enter Yom Kippur in a solemn state. You should not eat fatty foods, because that itself will actually diminish the mindset and the perspective what you're entering into. But it's a celebration. What are you celebrating? Because Hashem says there's a mitzvah saseh, and the Rambam rules this, that although one could do tshuva throughout the year, and he tells, and when you do tshuva and you make the confession, you fulfill a positive commandment, and the positive commandment is vidui, is to confess your sin. But on Yom Kippur, it's not when you do it, you fulfill the mitzvah, you're obligated to do it. Chayev odom lasu b'shuva. A person has an obligation to do tshuva on Yom Kippur. Why? Because the pasuk says, "L'fnei Hashem titoru." Before Hashem, you should purify yourself. Those are the words of the Rambam. But the Rambam says before that, why is it throughout the year it's your prerogative to do tshuva, not to do tshuva? And when you do tshuva, you fulfill the mitzvah saseh, the positive commandment. But on Yom Kippur, it's an obligation because it's kates slichu mechila. It's the end of the road. This is, until now, you can do tshuva tomorrow. But when it comes to Yom Kippur, this is the last opportunity. After this, if you don't do tshuva, the gates are closed and the verdict will be given. Therefore, because the expiration moment is coming, therefore this day, Hashem says, because it's Kate Slich Mechilo, you must do tshuva today. L'fnei Hashem titoru. This is an obligation. Hashem says, if you do tshuva on Yom Kippur, L'fnei Hashem titoru, you're forgiven, the record is corrected, and not only that, for every sin that you transgressed, when you do tshuva, you fulfill a positive commandment. That's what Yom Kippur is. Guaranteed. Could you imagine a person has endless debt, and this debt is so overwhelmingly weighs you down, and it's something that you'd have to deal with for eternity. That's the degree of debt, spiritual debt. And the ramifications, the consequences could be catastrophic on many levels, in the physical level and the spiritual level. And Hashem says, during the next 25-hour period, if you deal with the day appropriately, you observe the 5 areas of deprivation: not to eat, not to drink, not to wear leather shoes, not to anoint yourself, not to bathe, not to cohabit, and you do tshuva as you should, you're relieved of all that debt. No debt. It's as if the debt never existed. And not only that, for releasing yourself from that liability, Hashem says it's a mitzvah saseh, it's a positive commandment. Guaranteed. So as a result of that, before the day begins, since it's a guarantee, if you follow Hashem's prescription of the day, how to invest the day, and this is the end result, you already celebrate in advance for the upcoming opportunity, which is something which is, there's nothing equivalent of that opportunity. It's like, you get a call, you just won the $1 billion lottery, but you can't pick it up until 24 hours pass. Then you come pick up the ticket. But it's not a hoax, it's factually, it's been verified, it's been certified, you received a certified letter from the government, it's yours to pick up. What do you do at that moment? You're already celebrating. But you don't have it in your hand, it doesn't make a difference. You just have to go pick it up. Here, you just have to go through the process of the next 25 hours of doing Vidui, doing tshuva, and it being in a state of deprivation. Hashem says you've relieved yourself of all that debt. So the Suda Mafsekis of Erev Yom Kippur, which today you eat before Shkia, before sundown, after Mincha, after you already said one Vidui, because as we say, so now it's interesting. What is the chances a person will choke during this meal? What are the chances? I mean, it's remote. You're going to choke, God forbid. But yet, everybody says Vidui in Mincha, because when you eat that Suda, you never know what could happen. And Chas v'Sholom, believe this world without tshuva, we're not taking any chances. And during the year, why are we concerned? Now, Satan is always waiting and lurking to trip us up. You're about to enter into a day that Hashem says this is the day that Satan is shut down. As I mentioned, the Gemara tells us that the numerical value of Has-Satan is 364. That 364 days of the year, Hashem allows him to prosecute. Yom Kippur, Hashem does not allow Satan to prosecute. He tries to prosecute. He says, "Not now. I don't want to hear from you. You're not permitted to audit the record. The record cannot be audited today." So therefore, as a result of that, the Satan, he has only moments before Yom Kippur begins to really prevent you from doing tshuva. You eat a meal, and God forbid, you choke. God forbid a person chokes. That means Satan is won. That means you're stuck with the bag of debt, overwhelming debt, and he's there to prosecute you, as the Chazal tells, as he caused you, he seduced you to sin, he will be there to testify that you did sin. And he's waiting for that moment. Therefore, as a result of that, because we believe so succinctly and so definitely that Yom Kippur is a win-win, and we're celebrating it, so by knowing that, we don't want to take any chances. You don't want to take any chances because Satan is out there lurking. And appreciating, understand what Satan is, you don't take a chance. The whole concept we said of, if Rosh Hashanah falls on a Shabbos, we don't blow the shofar. Because there's a chance, because the person who's blowing the shofar, which is the mechanism which shuts down, silences Satan, he may transport that shofar in public domain. So Rameir Simcha asks, how many people, what's the likelihood a person is going to transport the shofar in public domain? Usually the person who blows the shofar or Rosh Hashanah, he's already qualified and adept at blowing the shofar. But you never know. There may be a handful of people may do it. You know something? Since there's a concept of arevus, all Jews are responsible for one another. If that mechanism is any way impaired, that shofar is the cause of Chilul Shabbos, you know something? We suspend the blowing of shofar. We're not going to take chances. But what's the likelihood? Even the one who has to be taught, is he going to? You never know. You never know. We don't want to take a chance. Because if factually it happens, this mechanism which shuts down Satan with scientism, because it represents the Akedah, immediately, it's not perfect. It's, as I said, it's impaired. It's an impaired solution. We don't want, therefore, we suspend it. We don't want to take a chance. The likelihood of choking is remote. But knowing and understanding what Yom Kippur is, we're celebrating, we're going to be relieved, and this is our belief without a question, that if you go through the process, you come out way on top as a winner. Not only you're not no longer a debtor, you're a winner. And Hashem is ecstatic that his children have returned. And you never know what the result of that return, what that will bring. Mincha Hashem, coming Mashiach, if we do it right enough, to be worthy. So therefore, we say the Vidui in the pre-Mincha, pre-Suda Mafsekes, in Mincha, rather than waiting for Yom Kippur, which the obligation, Torah obligations on Yom Kippur. Not, God forbid, to enter Yom Kippur, where a person did not do tshuva because he passed away before Yom Kippur. Now, the Yesod V'Shesh Avoda, which is a commentary on all the tefillos, weekday, Yom Tov, Shabbos, the Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, he speaks, it's all based on the Zohar, explains that the whole concept of Chamesh Inuyim, the 5 years of deprecation, it says there's a mitzvah of Inui. You should afflict yourself on Yom Kippur. Affliction is not to eat, not to drink, not to anoint yourself, not to bathe. All these areas, some are Doraisa, some are rabbinical. Every time you experience the Inui, that result of being deprived, that's part of the reinstatement. It's like when a person, God forbid, if he's in rehab from drugs and he has withdrawal symptoms, what's with the withdrawal? That's part of the recovery. You're recovering is the withdrawal. The body is fighting that foreign substance for the body to reestablish itself in a healthy state, because it's being denied that. When you go and you deny yourself in eating and drinking, which is areas that throughout the year we do many things which you shouldn't, even if you eat kosher, if the intent is not right. In other areas of pleasure, every part of that Inui process, of the affliction process, is part of the rehabilitation process. So rather than looking at your watch to see you're tired, you're hungry, you've been standing, and you keep looking, when's the fasting be over? He says just the opposite. Every time you feel that fatigue, you feel the hunger, it's a fulfillment of the positive commandment of afflicting yourself. There's a mitzvah aseh to be afflicted on Yom Kippur. And every time you experience that, it's mitzvah aseh. So therefore, rather than thinking, when is it going to be over? Just to the contrary, you should feel that's the opportunity, that's the success. It's like every time you put the pick into the diamond mine and you pick it out another diamond, although when you strike that wall to take the diamond out, you feel the pain of the vibration when you hit the stone, but you know when you hit that stone, the diamond's coming out. This 100-carat deflawless diamond, something which is exceptional, unusual, unlimited level of value. Same thing. That's the Yesod V'Shesh Avoda. But now, what is Vidui? The Rambam says Vidui is, you say, Nichamti. As we said, Vidui has to be verbalized. If you think it, it's not enough. It doesn't bring about the rehabilitation. Your feelings have to be articulated, have to be verbalized. And the Rambam says, you say Nichamti. You say boshti. I'm ashamed. I will not go back to that behavior pattern or that action ever again. That's what one has to think and feel, and that's what one has to say. You have to verbalize your feelings. Remorse, a sense of shame, and committed not to go back there. And if you're sincere, and the only one who knows that you're truly sincere is only Hashem, and the Rambam says, V'yoid all of Yodei Talumos, and the one who knows whatever is hidden, he could attest that what you feel and what you said is correct, then you're forgiven. But and then the Rambam says very interesting. He says this evaluation. He says, what is tzaddik? What is Rasha? If the majority of your accomplishments are positive, your classification is tzaddik. If the majority is negative, the classification is Rasha. And the Rambam says it's not a quantitative evaluation; it's a qualitative evaluation. He's quoting the Rambam verbatim. What does that mean? It means that a person can do one mitzvah. That one mitzvah, its innate value, is the equivalent of endless sins. So therefore, although quantitatively there are more sins than mitzvahs, but since this mitzvah is so special, his classification is tzaddik. And it goes the other way also, in the negative side. That if a person does one aveira, and that aveira, not understanding how serious it is, that one aveira is the equivalent of multiple mitzvahs. So therefore, the only one who has the ability to make this evaluation is only HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Only the one who knows all, he understands exactly how to make this evaluation, or the one tzaddik or Rasha. That's what it is. Now, the Rambam writes, when you do tshuva before Hashem. When you confess, who are you confessing to? You're not talking to yourself. You say to Hashem, I regret what I did. I'm ashamed for what I did. Now, why exactly does a person sin? Although he knows it's not right, it's the wrong thing to do. The Mishnah tells us in Brachos that when Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai was on his deathbed and his Talmidim came to receive a bracha before he passed away, so he said to them, you should fear Hashem the way you fear mankind, the way you fear your fellow. So they said, that's all. That's the bracha you're giving us. So he says, I want to ask you a question. When you sin, would you prefer to sin in a public setting or in a private setting? When a person's tempted, a person's not going to sin publicly where his peers see he's sinning because it'll cause him embarrassment. They'll see him in a negative light. How does he sin? Behind closed doors. But your fellow may not know, but Hashem does know. So what if you know Hashem is aware that you're sinning behind closed doors? What difference does it make if it's public or private? So you're more concerned for what man thinks than what Hashem thinks. Therefore, the bracha I'm giving you that you should fear Hashem the way you fear man, that is the ultimate bracha. That will cause you not to sin. Okay? So now, according to that, why does one sin? We know the halacha, but yet a person's rubbing the shul, or he has a certain position, and he's seen in a certain light, and he's tempted, and he wants to rationalize to justify something, just this one time, whatever the justification is. He's not going to do it publicly, because he'll be seen, it'll diminish his status in the eyes of his community, or of his peers, of his fellows. But if you know Hashem is fully aware and understands it's a bunch of, you're deluding yourself, so how do you do it? How do you convince yourself? How do you delude yourself if you know Hashem is aware? You know what the answer is? Because in your mind, Hashem is not fully, you're not fully in his presence. That's the way a person is experiencing the moment. Although you're sinning before Hashem, for all intents and purposes, you're ignoring God. Because if you would be fully in touch and internalize that reality, you couldn't sin. You wouldn't have crossed that line. It's only because you ignored it. You put God on back burner. So when one does tshuva, what does one have to? How does one confess? You confess before God. I regret. I'm ashamed. But it has to be you're speaking to Hashem. Although I ignored you, I deluded myself. I put you in the deepest recesses of my mind and emotion. I regret that, because if I would have been fully in touch of who you are and the reality of that moment, I wouldn't have sinned. Therefore, it's b'fnei Hakel Yisborach. You have to confess before Hashem. And you have to have that in mind. Now, the Rambam says it's not enough, and it's the position of Rambam, to say, I regret my sins, I have remorse for my sins, I'm ashamed, I commit myself not to sin again. You have to articulate the particular sin, whether it's Lashon Hara, whether it's eating something not kosher, whether it's touching muktzah on Shabbos or Yom Tov, whether it's speaking at a time where you shouldn't have spoken, even though it's rabbinical. You spoke during Kriyas HaTorah, you spoke during Chazor Sashatz, you spoke Shabbos or Yom Tov about commercial business activities, which are not permitted. You have to articulate exactly what the sin is. You just, I sinned. I'm sorry for all the sins I've committed, I've transgressed. It's not enough. You have to speak specifically about the particular sin. And every time you say the sin, you have to say, verbalize, I have remorse, I'm ashamed, and I will not do it again. So therefore, in the years ago, before we had the Art Scroll Mauser, you would buy these booklets or sheets that were printed, and according to the Oshamnus, which is according to the Aleph Beis, I'll give you an example. The word Oshamnu means we're guilty. The guilt offering is called an Osham. It's a guilt offering. And you say Oshamnu. And when you say Oshamnu, you're supposed to say it in a slightly bent position. You're bent over, which indicates a level of what? Of humility. You're weighed down. And you say Oshamnu. When you say Oshamnu, you say Ochalti b'li brocha tchila v'sof. I've eaten throughout the year without a pre-brocha and a post-brocha. It happens throughout the year. Person forgets to say a brocha. More often, the person normally says brochas. The pre-brocha person always says, was his condition. But the after brocha, if you don't say it immediately when you finish eating, what happens? Very often you forget to say the brocha, although you had an obligation. Therefore, you say, Ochalti b'li brocha tchila v'sof. Ochalti, I've eaten to only satisfy my desires without any relevance to be healthy to serve Hashem. Ochalti chutz l'sukkah achilas keva. You're not permitted to eat out of a sukkah something which is substantial, like a meal, unless you have no choice. But the times you didn't want to inconvenience yourself and you didn't eat in the sukkah, and you ate something which you were supposed to eat in the sukkah, you ate in your house. Especially if you have a private home, you have the sukkah on the deck, and you could have eaten it on the sukkah. You didn't want to bother yourself. You ate it in the house. It's Torah violation. Because Torah says for 7 days, you must eat in the sukkah. If it's a certain amount of food and certain type of food. Ochalti mancholas asuros. I've eaten something doesn't have really a good certification. But you somehow said, it's what could not be kosher about it? But you understand, many things are not kosher unless you know they're kosher. So throughout the year, we gloss over many things which we're not permitted to. When you say the Oshamnus, everyone, give it another base. When you say Oshamnu bogadnu, we've betrayed you. Bogadnu is betrayal. For the base, you say Bitalnu Torah, Yom V'Leilos. We were Mevatel Torah, we did not study day and night, continuously. We just whittled the time away, where that time could have been, when you're working, there's no claim against you. You should have been studying. You're in life, what about all the time you had, which you could have studied and you didn't study? There's a claim. You have to do tshuva, because there's an obligation that every free moment, sometimes you need relaxation. Okay? The Gemara tells us Reb Zera that when he reached a level that he was so fatigued from learning, he would sit at the entrance of the Beis Medrash, because he couldn't, his mind wasn't working any longer. And every person who came to the Medrash, every Talmud Chacham, he would stand for. He wanted to maximize. If he can't use his mind, he stood for to acknowledge, to fulfill the positive commandment of when they say V'tokum, to acknowledge a sage when he comes when he passes by him. But how much time did we just waste, which we could have? So that's Beis, Bital Torah. What about Birachnu Brocha Levatolo? We said a brocha in vain. Or Birachnu Brocha Sheina Tzricha. We said an unnecessary brocha. Give you an example. Friday night, you're waiting to wash, you're going to say the motzi in about a minute. This is Ashkenazim. And there's a plate of vegetables in the kitchen that your wife is going to put on the table to serve. And while you're waiting, you want to nibble on some of those vegetables. If you wait a minute after washing, the motzi will cover that bracha. But you want to eat it before, because you don't want to wait. We're talking moments. And you say, Bar Pi Adama on those vegetables. It's a bracha shein tzricha. That's a bracha in vain. It was unnecessary. Because if you would have waited a moment, because you're gonna wash and say the motzi, which you would covered, it's not necessarily that bracha. It's an unnecessary bracha. That's bracha shein tzricha. So what about the many times we say brachas, which it's not? We forget. Person said a bracha, and then afterwards he realizes he already said the bracha on that food before. So what does he do? He says he's supposed to say Baruch Shem Kvod Malchus Shalom Ved. When you realize you said a bracha which was unnecessary, but factually you did the wrong thing. Tefillin, when we wear tefillin sharosh, Ashkenazim say a bracha on tefillin sharosh. We say Baruch Shem Kvod Malchus Shalom Ved. Why? Because since there's an opinion that one bracha is enough to cover both, so to cover that opinion, we say Baruch Shem Kvod Malchus Shalom Ved. That's the reason why. But we really rule that sharosh requires its own bracha. But outside of that, whenever we say Baruch Shem Kvod Malchus Shalom Ved, is when we realize it was unnecessary to say the bracha, we forgot, and we said it not said bracha, so we say Baruch Shem Kvod Malchus Shalom Ved. But you did the wrong thing. That's called Baruch Shein Tzricha. It's only because we don't think, and we blurted it out. Baruch Shein Tzricha. Gimel, Gazalmu. We've stolen. What's stealing? Stealing, you put your hand in another guy's pocket. What about you work for an employer and you take off time from your work time to do your own thing? People, sometimes they work for a company, they get on the phone and they do their own business on the phone, or they just waste time. It's time to get back to work. So even though the employer understands people are far from perfect and they allow it, but some people, they take advantage. You take a lunch break and you stay out too long, and you should have been back at your desk and you had responsibilities. When you go and you put something on the company's account, which you have no right to put it on the company's account because you have the company credit card, whatever it is. But we're talking, if you're in violation of stealing, if it's a shavet pruta, as much as a penny. And according to the Rambam, even postum shavet pruta. In Hilchos Geneva, the Rambam says it's a Torah violation. Even postum shavet pruta. Sets goes on. What about if you go and you infringe another person's time? You're in shul. As I always say, a person speaks during davening when he's not permitted to speak. You finish your Shmon Esrei within moments. Other people are davening and you speak. Because you're not so religious. You're not that, you don't adhere to the laws to such a degree. I always say, where did the person fail? He failed in Yiddishkeit because he's right. Let's say he spoke when he's not, but now he finished the Shemon Esrei. And now when he speaks, he's infringing on other people that they can't concentrate. Because he's speaking, he doesn't go out in the hall to speak. He speaks right next to a person who's still davening Shemon Esrei. Is that a failing in Yiddishkeit or Menschlichkeit? You're not behaving properly. If you have consideration for your fellow who wants to not to be distracted, how do you speak? Well, I have a right to speak. I finished my Shemon Esrei. Yeah, but you have no right to step on the other guy. Right? That's called stealing. Infringement on another person's rights, where you have no right, like a damager, he's in violation of, that's called stealing. According to the Rishonim, when you damage, you're taking something that you're doing something you have no right to do. Infringing a person's time, his rights, it's considered stealing. I was once flying to Israel one of the times, and you want to sleep. And there's somebody sitting next to me, somebody standing right in front of me, talking to the person right next to me. You understand? So I open my eyes and say, excuse me, do you see I'm trying to get some sleep? He's standing right over me, talking to the person next to me. Yeah, there's such a lack of consideration. All that matters is his conversation he doesn't even notice me. Because he did notice me. You don't think a person could be that arrogant. But people are so conditioned in this kind of behavior, they don't even realize what's going on. They don't realize what they're doing. But that, you have to do tshuva. Dibarnu dofi. This is a tough one. I've spoken dofi, worthless words. Dibarnu lashon hara. Speak lashon hara. For every time you speak lashon hara, according to the Chofetz Chaim, he goes and enumerates how many negative and positive commandments you're in violation of. The time, over a short period of time, you can be in violation of 17 negative commandments and 14 positive commandments. That's Dibarnu Dofi. Dibarnu Lashon Hara. Dibarti Rechibus. I was Motzi Shemra. I spoke things which weren't true to actually badmouth another person. Dibarnu Mokshosel Daber. I spoke where I wasn't permitted to speak, like during davening. Dibur Chol b'Shabbos. I spoke the Yom Tov. I spoke a weekday discussion on Shabbos and Yom Tov. And every time you say it, you have to think, I have remorse, I'm ashamed, I'm not going to do it again. So the famous question is, which the Moral discusses, it says, Yod Olav Yodei Talumas. Hashem has to attest that you're sincere what you say. A person is not careful, speaks Lashon Hara. Person has remorse, I will not speak Lashon Hara again for this coming year. Is that reality? Who are you fooling? Right? Of course you're going to speak Lashon Hara. So he goes to explain the 13th attribute of mercy is v'nakeh. Nakeh. Nakeh means he cleanses. He cleanses, he removes. If a person speaks Lashon Hara, he says, this coming year, I will speak 5% less Lashon Hara. Because I can't change it in a day, in a moment. But I know 5% less I could speak. And I'll start studying the laws of Shmir Saloshin. And ultimately, when I get better at it, I'll will it down and I'll speak less. That's the attribute of mercy. That even though it's like a person says, I kill 5 people a day, I'm only going to kill 3, not 5. But you're a murderer. Doesn't make a difference. That's the mercy of Hashem, that although you're still a transgressor and you're still involved doing the wrong thing, if you're willing to do less, Hashem is willing to forgive you. Otherwise, a person would say, what do you mean? If you're going to be the same criminal, you're going to steal less, but you're a criminal, you're going to be punished. The mercy of Hashem says, if you do less, Hashem will forgive you for the less. And especially if the mindset is, because you can't change in a moment, he will not hold you accountable for even what you violate. He'll give you a chance to do tshuva eventually, and you will not be prosecuted even when you do the wrong thing. That's v'nakeh. That's the attribute of mercy. So when we make commitments not to do things again, to make an unrealistic commitment, which is not sincere, and it's total self-delusion, we don't do that. We try to be truthful with ourselves. To make a level of commitment, what I won't do is something which is within my reality.
So,
Gemara says, and the Rambam rules in Hilchos Tshuva, that you're not forgiven on a transgression being Odom l'chavero unless the person who you actually transgressed against forgives you. You have to ask forgiveness. Okay? So it's a tough one. And the Chofetz Chaim says, therefore, if you speak Lashon Hara about people, sometimes you're ashamed, and you have to. He goes, by the way, I want his forgiveness. What did I do? Say, accidentally, I bumped into you. Accidentally, okay, person lets it go. I spoke behind your back and I said something which is very bad. And what happens? You have a chance. The person, by the way, what did you say? And he's not going to forgive you unless you tell him what he said. And very often, even to say to the person, I did speak about you negatively, the person has a relationship, you don't want to say that. So there's a degree of embarrassment. So therefore, whenever we go into that area, the likelihood of asking for forgiveness is much more difficult. But you have to ask forgiveness. And that's the reason why tonight, before Kol Nidre, there's a tefillah called Tefillah Zakah. It's in the Machzor. It was authored by the Chai Yodam, where we say there, we forgive anybody who sinned against us. If you say Kriya Shema Lamita every night, there's a paragraph before, and you say, if I forgive anybody who sinned against me, why? Because I don't want anybody to be accountable because of myself, because I did not forgive him. Very often, what do you accomplish by not forgiving? Let's say somebody spoke Lashon Hara about you. And he spoke, and you don't forgive him. That means that person's accountable. Even if there's tshuva, he's accountable. So why does Hashem have to punish him? Because you aren't willing to let go. But why don't you let go? Let it go. What do you accomplish by not forgiving? You accomplish nothing. Do you think Hashem wants to punish his children? He doesn't want to punish him. But Hashem over here has no choice because the one he sinned against is not willing to let go, to release him. So if there's nothing to gain by not forgiving, forgive everybody. If it's a debt, somebody owes you money, there's no reason to let it go because the man owes you the money. And if you could collect, you want to collect. Over a person is a repeated offender. Person asks you forgiveness, but tomorrow he's going to do the same thing over again. There's no reason to forgive that person. But if a person is sincere and he's asked forgiveness, and these type of people make mistakes and they behave irresponsibly, foolishly, let it go. And when you let it go, you're doing a mitzvah. Because as a result of that, Hashem doesn't have to punish that person. Hashem doesn't want to punish. There's a famous story with Arizal. Somebody had actually offended one of his close talmidim, his close students. And he goes to the person, he says, before Yom Kippur, you should really forgive him. So the student said to the Arizal, to his Rebbe, he says, I want to explain to the Rebbe, when that person offended me, initially, I forgave him immediately. I never had a claim against him. I ignored it, and therefore I never had a claim against that person. He doesn't need forgiveness. But, we're not at that level. Initially, we're taken aback. We feel negative towards that person because he offended you, whatever it is. Something, let it go. And you let it go now when he does tshuva, his Yom Kippur now is going to be fully meaningful. Because now Hashem will give him the release. Otherwise, he doesn't give him that release. Had a case a year ago, 2 years ago. There was a certain person who owed another person money in business, and he had borrowed something, and the person never paid back. And the person was very upset. The one who was the lender was very upset, and that person is living his life as if he never owes the debt, because he has priorities, and he just ignores his creditor, doesn't pay back, and the person's very upset. So the person says, "What should I do?" The one who's owed the money, what should I do? I say, something? If it's a question he may have stolen from you. He hurt you. Forgive him on that. Don't forgive the debt. You're not waiving the debt. He owes you the money. And whenever you could collect, you can collect. But for all the peripheries of that or the side issues, he hurt your feelings, he's considered a thief, he's considered this or whatever it is, let them all go. So as a result of that, there's no claim. He's a debtor. And you're not willing to waive the debt, so whenever you're able to claim the debt, you claim the debt. So as a result of that, you're releasing him from most of the negative, and he's not going to be held accountable. As a result of that, when he does tshuva or whatever he did, if he does tshuva, now it's up to him to what he wants to do. He wants to straighten out his relation with Hashem, that's his business. But you, from your side, You've given him the release. He can do what he wants now. But you're not the cause of his level of accountability.
Give our fellow
I want to mention my Mashgiach Zechrein Mebrocha, who's a Talmud of Mir Yeshiva in Europe, who was the closest student of Reb Chatzkel Levenstein, Mebrocha from Reb Yeruchim. They were the Mashgiachim in the Mir in Europe. He would tell us before Yom Kippur, every person should make a declaration. I forgive anybody who sinned against me. For that reason, he would, when he would finish the shmuz before Yom Kippur, he said it many times, everybody should make a statement, not think about it, but verbalize, I forgive anybody person who sinned, because you don't want anybody to be held accountable because of yourself. It's a terrific thing. So if you say tefillah zako, which it's a lengthy tefillah, as I said in the Mauser, people come late, but that's part of it, and that's why it's so important. He included that in there, that you're giving a release to anybody who sinned against you. But if you don't say tefillah zaka, which many people don't, we don't get to that point. It's a problem, a very big problem. There's a famous story I told over, as I was famous if you know the story. Rebbe Lapian, who was at the age of 27, had Gilui Elio, and he was in England till he was 70 years old. He moved to Eretz Yisrael, and eventually he was the mashgiach. There was a yeshiva near Haifa. It was a Rechasim, and a certain student comes to him before Yom Kippur or during the year and says, Rebbe, I want to ask forgiveness. I spoke Lashon Hara about you. And Rebbe Eli Lapizan says, what did you say? Tell me what you said about me. He said something which it was so off mark, it has no relevance. It was so unconscionable. Rebbe Eli Lapizan was shocked that this person could say such a thing about him. So Rebbe Eli Lapizan says, I don't forgive you. It was such a outlandish, negative remark. I don't forgive you. He says, but you want to know something? I'm going to think about it. Come back to me in a week. Comes back in a week. Rebbe Eli Lapian says to him, I fully forgive you with a full heart. And he goes to explain to the student, he says, why did I tell you to come back in a week? Because initially, when you told me what you'd said, I was very upset. And even if I would have forgiven you, but I wouldn't have forgiven you with a full heart. And if I would have forgiven you with a full heart, you're not really, truly, fully forgiven. So I wanted to think about why should I not forgive you? Just to be able to deal with it. And it took me a week. And now I put it in perspective. Now I forgive you with a full heart. That you'd be a full beneficiary of my forgiveness. Okay? So even people go, forgive me. I forgive you. The person just wants to release. But does the person really, is he going to do it again? Is he going to change his behavior? But something for the sake of what we call, for the sake of peace, you forgive him. You finish eating. And the Mishnah Berurah says this regarding Tisha B'Av, after Suda Mafsekes, here also. When a person benches, you have to say, he says, better to say it, verbalize it. When I bench, I'm not accepting the fast. After Suda Mafsekes could be another hour and a half before the fast starts. You're not accepting the fast. You should say, I'm not accepting it. Although I'm saying I'm not accepting the fast. So now if you want to drink or eat anything, you're permitted. But otherwise, there's a question when you say to Birch, I'm finished eating. And if there's a chance finish eating means you're beginning the fast, that's considered you're not permitted to eat or drink. Therefore, to cover all bases, you should say, before you bench, although I'm going to bench, I have in mind I'm going to continue eating and drinking until I choose to stop eating or drinking, and I accept the fast upon myself.
Rabbi, I have
Yes.
a practical question.
Yeah.
When you